Good afternoon. My name is Tosin Oshinowo. I'm an architect, and I run a practice in Lagos called CM Design Atelier. Lagos is one of the most populated cities in Africa, with 15.3 million people. I am Yoruba, a West African ethnic group which inhabits Nigeria, Benin, and Togo. If you've watched the 2022 movie, The King Women, the Yorubas were the bad guys. Outside of Africa, the Yoruba diaspora consists of two main groupings. The first, who were dispersed into the New World between the 16th and 19th centuries, notably to Cuba and Brazil, and the second, a recent group of migrants who emigrated to the United Kingdom and United States following some significant economic and political changes in the continent from the 1960s upwards. I mention my ethnicity because it's synonymous with my existence. These statues are called Ere Ibeji. Ere Ibeji is an Orisha, a deity representing a pair of twins in Yoruba. In our culture and spirituality, twins are believed to be magical and have protection from the Orisha Shango. However, if one twin should die, it's seen as a bad fortune for the parents and the community they belong to. The parents, therefore, commission a Babalawo to have a statue of the deceased twin, and they take care of it like a real person. By Yoruba belief, the firstborn is called Taiwo and the second Kehinde. Taiwo is considered to be younger because Taiwo has been sent by Kehinde to see if the world is fit and good before he or she descends. 1 in 10 births in the southwestern part of Nigeria, where the Yoruba indigenous are twins. My second name is Kehinde. I am indeed the younger twin. I mention this to highlight the importance of context and the relevance of my culture and contextuality, which I intentionally incorporate into my work. I will give this presentation in 4 parts. The first, I will present the principle of Ashe, and then I will go on to highlight this concerning the African context and our architectural evolution. I will then go on to express how it's been shown in my practice, and finally how I relate this as a curator to the 2023 Sharjah Architecture Triennial. Ashe is a philosophical concept that is defined by the Yorubas to represent the power that makes things happen. In effect, it is an affirmation. I relate Ashe in architecture to the intentional contextuality of materiality. How this represents itself is not just the intention to work with nature, but the importance it plays in creating identity and contextuality of place. To understand this, we must appreciate the role industrialization has played in influencing this principle, and the importance of traditional technologies and the tensions between natural constructs and urbanization. Malthus was an economist and demographer, and he had a theory on the relationship between population growth and food supply. Living in the 18th and 19th centuries, he observed that population growth was potentially exponential, while food supply and other resources were linear. His theory was that if food wasn't developed, it would eventually lead to population die-off. Technological advances have allowed for increased supply, and our population has grown beyond exponential. We can see here that from the 1700s, we then now have what we know as the birth of the modern city. This illustration of Benin, constructed between 1800 and 1400 AD, is an excellent example of how most land movement was experienced on foot. With services and supplies concentrated to the center of cities, the developmental radius of the heart of the city was about a mile, about a 30-minute walking distance for a person. This meant that materials used to build, irrespective of a location, were locally sourced. This series of images, taken in the 1970s, is of a palace in Kano, applying the final layer of waterproofing called makuba. The contextuality has a natural cycle of life, like the human body, a process of regeneration and renewal. Pre-industrialization, innovations occurred in contextual materiality, creating architecture with an identity and cultural reference. How do we address and reflect these principles today in our ever-globalizing world? In modernity, how do we encourage innovation contextually through building materials? With this in mind, how can we retain cultural relevance and place and identity? How do we relate contextual materiality towards the requirements of industrialized world's need for speed and scale? My recently completed project in northeastern Nigeria required a lot of regional travel. I noticed several traditional settlements along the flight path before entering Lagos. It surprised me how many people away from urban areas still live with these principles of contextuality. This Google image taken in 2021 is of one such settlement, alive and well. This is the points in case highlighting the importance of context and culture in architecture. Pre- and post-colonial Africa, the house is the center of the world. For example, our use of spaces centered around an interior, as can be seen from this Dagoma compound, typical of a compound house with many variations across the continent. This research here, done by Nana Ofusu and Bushra Mohammed into the compound house, shows across the continent, though vast and diverse, the sense of community and a social construct is common and reflected in this typology. Even in the modern home today, the layers of public and private space are achieved like their traditional counterpart. But how did this relate to industrialization? Our modernity will continue to be marked by rural-urban migration. As a result, the need for speed and scale is more relevant to sustain our humanity than ever before. But to understand this further, we need to see how industrialization and modernity's role has played out on the continent. To do this, we need to look at colonization. The period between the Second World War and the 1970s saw the liberalization of a continent that resulted in forming economies, developing cities, and largely rural settlements. This liberalization and subsequent cultural emancipation came with a promise of economic prosperity, manifested in the recasting of modernism as nationalism. Modernism offered a blank canvas and an opportunity to build a neo-equitable identity that negated ethnic diversity and cultural expression, which was necessary for African societies emerging from colonial rule. With this came tropical modernism, a design movement creating the modernist buildings that principle climate-conducive design. And this illustration celebrates Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew's work in West Africa. And the breeze block became a symbol of that period. These tessellation pattern-forming blocks use natural air movement between sunny and shaded parts of a building to cool and create privacy. These principles are relevant and appropriate for using concrete in the tropics and supported the nationalist identity. Sadly, in many cases, these schemes negated the temporal context and cultural use of space. Much of Africa has failed to live up to the promise of independence, prosperity, and her cities' modernist ideologies have crippled under the weight of oversubscription. The 80s to 90s saw the tail end of this progressive decade of city infrastructure development across the continent. The challenge here was the prescribed notion that a continent alleviated from colonialism had to catch up with the rest of the world. In addition, regional infrastructure development prescribed by colonialist governance continued to encourage rural to urban migration without upgrading city infrastructure. Tropical modernism can be criticized for not considering African societies' many ways of life and cultural habits. Alas, the principle of the compound house. Modernism should have adopted to culture and not culture to modernism. Many projects of this period negated the natural flow and use of space by indigenous communities in replacement of what at the time was considered progressive. Architects like Alan Vaughan Richards, a British Nigerian, was active in the post-colonial architecture industry, and he incorporated work of Nigerian artists in many of his commissions. In addition, he engaged architects in the potential influence of architectural forms through his magazine, The West African Builder and Architect. Trained at the Architecture School London in the 50s, he studied cultural nuances in architecture in Nigeria, and many of his commissions were hybrids. His house in Ikoyi, close to the lagoon, was influenced by the Hausa village and designed in a modern style, and he gained recognition for incorporative communal spaces in his buildings. Demas Woku has recently been awarded the Golden Lion Lifetime Achievement at the Biennial Architectura 2023, curated by Leslie Loko. An architect and artist, in the 1950s, he formed an art society called the Zaria Rebels with a handful of other prominent artists. Their goal was to introduce indigenous ideas and forms into the post-colonial landscape while simultaneously incorporating a few techniques brought by Westerners. This objective carried on into his practice, where he worked with local materials to create a new distinct design language. This project here is the Dominican Republic Church, which was completed in the 1970s. At the macro scale, the post-colonial African city's expression of public space is another example of cultural reappropriation. Traffic jams as active locations for trade and informal temporal markets are cultural nuances towards the use of space. The need for communal draws relation to the compound house and the layering between the public and the private. Scarcity, a condition we associate with modernity, has formed a basis of existence. And the 80s and 90s saw the innovations coming out of these conditions. Nifemi Bello's project, The Designer's Utopia, has been cataloging these collective contemporary knowledges through the indigenous products produced by scarcity. And now I shall relate Ashe to my practice. The United Nations Development Programme commissioned us to design a rehousing scheme for 500 homes with support facilities for a community that had been displaced in the northeastern part of Nigeria by the Boko Haram insurgency. Boko Haram is an Islamic militant organization based in the northeastern part of Nigeria and is also active in Chad, Niger, northern Cameroon, and Mali. To put this in perspective, I'm from Lagos in the Christian South, to Borno in the Muslim North, where there's heightened security concerns. Nigeria has a diverse group of ethnicities, 250 to be precise, and I had never been to the northern part of Nigeria, and I approached this project with a clear emphasis on understanding its context. This is a Kanuri village, close to the site of our proposal. The exact location. The donations for this project came from Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and the European Union, and this funded the project. The Borno state government also had to be satisfied with the design scheme, but as an architect, my priority was the community as end users. I immersed myself in the culture of Borno, specifically the Kanuri community I had designed for. I spent time with them in the internally displaced people camps, observing how they lived, worked, interacted, and played. I was reminded that irrespective of the lottery of birth, it is human to aspire for better conditions. I visited buildings that were built with the traditional techniques, as well as other resettlement projects, to understand what had worked and what hadn't, so to speak. I paid attention to understanding the importance of culture, and the importance of designing for religious practice. I listened. I was particularly fascinated by the Kanuri women and their intricate needlework with the bam-bam cap. The bam-bam cap is men's headwear worn with traditional dress, indigenous to the Kanuri, but has become a favorite across Nigeria's many ethnic groups. With knowledge passed down for generations, these women are experts at creating tessellation patterns using a series of matte sequence through colored thread. Each cap takes about 3 to 4 weeks to produce, and they're as diverse as the human thumbprint. My interest in this aspect of their culture formed a running thread from which I drew inspiration. In addition to my observations, I also observed the traditional building typologies and layouts. As a Muslim household, there is an emphasis on the separation of public and private. This image here shows the Zahuri, a reception building where male visitors are received and should have no lines of sight to the inner compound where the women of the household have privacy. It was essential also to conduct comparative analysis of traditional and contemporary land allocations within each unit, and to create the right balance between needs and construction costs. The Zahuri and the compound house form the basis of the housing units in my proposal. Several other considerations were made. For example, the construction had to be swift and delivered in less than a year, as part of a stabilization scheme prioritizing security for the community. We needed to design specific for the constraints of speed and scale. As such, building materials are contemporary, but as a composition, they are respectful and acknowledging of place. The scheme required the design to work climatically and prioritize the principles of cross-ventilation with rooms and the roofing structure. The climatic condition is Sahel savanna, with little canopy cover and shade. The Kanuri tessellation patterns as design inspiration were used to create much-needed shaded spaces. The provision for facilities to encourage economic reliance were provided to the community through this marketplace. And education as a bedrock to society was included here, as you can see the students in their crisp new uniforms. Classroom facilities were also designed to inspire and celebrate the unique culture of the Kanuri people. Where the insurgency's priority had been to stifle education, the provision for development is at the forefront of countering such causes of insurgency. The police station is positioned as a place of convergence, and physically and figuratively is essential for a community. But here I want to highlight the importance of color in this project. As part of my early meetings with the community, I met with the Bale, who is the community head, and asked what their color preferences would be. Color plays an essential role in our experience of space, and it felt natural to inquire. As we sat underneath the neem tree in a school constructed by the local government, he pointed to a color which is known as Abuja brown. In my research regarding traditional technologies, I realized that this is the color of their traditional walls, made from the local earth. And the expectation the community required was actually yearning for the familiar. In this project, no paint was used. We achieved this textured color by a combination of local soil, sourced from down the road, cement, and a bonding agent. The community moved into the homes in October 2022, and the feedback so far has been positive. The long-term goal is that the intention is to foster development for a community by providing a sustainable platform for economic growth, and most importantly, give people the dignity by offering them homes that provide members of a community cause to be house proud. It took a madman of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of those madmen. We must dare to invent the future. What we learn from contemporary Africa's challenges is a lesson on the importance that architecture cannot be the premise of a top-down discipline. The indigenous traditions of a region, collective knowledge born out of daily practice and resolve, are innovations and ingenious coping mechanisms. Therefore, responding to a site should not be the solution based on understanding of the environment alone, but the cultural nuances of the location and attention to the material and contextuality of place. Africa must not be seen to be attempting to catch up with modernism, but modernism with the continent. As the rest of the world faces similar challenges due to our current climate crisis, the continent's resilience is a case of an alternative approach. Our innovations are based on ingenuity, materiality, and contextual relevance. The challenge they face is their lack of acquiescence to industrialization. And this, the potential scaling, is pivotal towards our global solutions. And now I shall present how I relate this principle of Ashe as the curator for the Architecture Triennial in Sharjah. As I mentioned Ashe, I'm keen to identify it in relation to framing of identity and contextuality of place. The Triennial has given me a platform to converge like-minded practitioners. I'm keenly aware of the importance of context, which has given way to an alternative view on sustainability, one that merits local materials and local appropriation architecture that strays away from Western modernization and global style. Architecture needs to reference where it's from. It needs to be conscious of the environment, and it needs to pull inspiration from its context. Architecture needs to acknowledge its temporality to nature and respond to social constructs. Sharjah is a brilliant backdrop to highlight this positioning. As a cultural capital of the UAE, so much has been done here to amplify cultural nuances of a region. And so the beauty of impermanence, we will explore design solutions built from conditions of scarcity and how these illuminate a pathway forward to reorientate our conversations on sustainability. Whereas the current global perspective on sustainability relies on technological innovation, this perspective prioritizes contextual solutions, resource sharing, and waste reuse. We will showcase examples of work based on a foundational notion of regeneration and renewal, which underscores an understanding of circularity that has been with us for generations. We will explore ingenious techniques embracing the idea that everything is impermanent and subject to change. Rather, we will work with nature rather than against it. And I will share today some of the participants whose practice responds to this theme, but most importantly, these practices will respond with new work in response to this prompt. Wall Makers, principal by Vinu Daniels, has an engineering background. And before Wall Makers, he worked for the Aroville Earth Institute for the UNDP post-tsunami construction. Their first project included a compound wall, built from earth, and radically pulled a lot of local interest. They have since devoted their energy towards the cause of sustainable, aesthetically striking, and cost-effective architecture. With a practice spanning a decade, Wall Makers has received a lot of international attention, and in 2022, they won the Royal Academy Doffman Award, conducted by the Royal Academy of Arts, London. Abia Sekile is a Jordan-Palestinian interdisciplinary artist, architect, designer, and cultural producer. Her work is deeply rooted in the act of memory, journaling, documenting, archiving, and collecting, and she views her practice as a social technology of cultural empowerment. Her recent work centers around the indigenous Bedouin knowledge and practice recovering the intimacy of handmaking lost to today's production. She has regularly traveled the Jordan Baidia Desert, where she engages Bedouin women in tent making and textile making craftsmanship. Limbo Accra is a collaborative spatial design studio founded by Dominic Ferrer and ML Grip, and they work on architecture and urban design projects and public art installations. Much of their work emerges from interdisciplinary engagement and experimentation with the aesthetics and cultural significance of unfinished, decaying concrete structures in West Africa. And their broader scope of work practice bridges the legacy between contemporary African architecture and youth development, as can be seen in this park, Freedom Skate Park in Accra, Ghana. Emory Plassé is principal by Papa Matayo, who graduated from the Wells School of Architecture. He's an award-winning architect, designer, writer, and filmmaker. And their work strongly focuses on exploring the nature of culture and the context of contemporary Nigeria and the extended Africa condition. A firm believer in creating work from cross-disciplinary collaboration and participation, he strives to find new possibilities of creating nuanced visual narratives in Nigeria's urban centers and beyond. Alborde from Ecuador has a practice that inhabits the territory of questioning the certainties about what architecture should or should not be in constant construction. Their practice inhabits territory of questioning, where certainties about architecture, what they should or should not be, and their ideas are developed in the making and the greater precision of detailing on site. They build with resources and techniques of place, where the territory is always particular and a unique variable. Their projects are an X-ray of the site and speak to people's customs, histories, problems, and needs. The diversity of their projects represents people's willingness to engage with ideas, take risks, and participate in decision-making. And so I bring us back to this principle of Asher and the importance in architectural discourse. As practitioners, with a respectable consciousness for our environmental challenges and constraints, we must reorientate ourselves towards a culturally relevant architecture. We must be mindful of contextual and material tectonics, and the importance of adapting our buildings and urbanscapes to climate conditions. Can you see yourselves applying Asher in your approach? Thank you.